welcome to this week's episode of Opera and Me. I'm your host, Robert Mellon. On this week's episode, we have Millie Hiibel on the program. Millie is the costume designer for Opera Maine. She's also the costume director at Opera Philadelphia and is a visiting lecturer in theater arts at the University of Pennsylvania. Millie has been with Opera Maine since 2012 when she started with the production of Madama Butterfly. Since then, she has worked hand in hand with Donna D. Vaughn over the last 8 years to create some memorable productions. We'd like to start this episode off by showing the first half of the 8 years that Millie has spent with Opera Maine. You'll see photos from the productions of Madama Butterfly, La Bohème, Rigoletto, and Tosca. After this short slideshow, please enjoy the interview between me and Millie Hiibel. I'll see you on the other side. Hi, Millie. Thank you so much for joining me today on Opera and Me. When you begin to work on a production, what is that dialogue like when you begin to come up with these ideas as to what it's going to look like for each individual on stage?
Yeah, so it always starts with a discussion about concept. And concept is a word that designers and directors like to throw around, but it just basically gives us an idea of like time period, aesthetic, and also like what the director wants to say about the production. There might be something specific that the director wants to make a statement about, that pertains to the time period, or just sort of a general sort of like, idea. I know for the Flying Dutchman, there was very much an interest in tying it into Maine's maritime history. So that was like very much a part of like the initial discussions, like how to do that. It might be shifting the years around a little bit, that would be reflected in the clothing.
How much of your work prior to actually coming up with renderings and ideas is research, book work, history, like you just spoke of?
Yes, so a lot of my preliminary work is history. So compiling images, looking through like online libraries, just simply Googling images, or looking at reference photos. Because I've been doing this for a while, like I don't necessarily need to like Google like what a woman's Victorian dress looks like. But if something is being built or made, like that's always like really helpful for like the costume makers to have, so they can get like a specific idea about the line, and the draping of the garments.
When you first stepped into the role as a costume director with a company, whether it was an opera company or a theater company or whatnot. How did that feel, that you were now in charge and now you had to make these decisions? Was that a daunting a realization?
I, I mean, it still feels daunting sometimes. Like sometimes I feel like, because I'm going to step back and say, for one thing, is that one thing that's great about this business is that it's never boring. And every time you're doing a new project, it's almost like going into it as it's like a new job, because the elements are never going to be the same. Now, having said that, I, at this point, like, feel confident about putting clothes on over 100 people, where I may not have done that, like felt confident early in my career and like thought like, oh my gosh, like how on earth am I going to do this? But I've done enough opera, and I've also done some film work where I've had to costume background, that I feel confident that I can do it, but it is always overwhelming, because there's always something that that you can't find, or you thought you had a handle on, and then something happens and that supplier like says like, I can't do this, or whatever it is.
Let's talk about the difference between preparing for the 2018 production of Le Nozze di Figaro, which was a very Downton Abbey type feel.
Yes.
And then going to the following summer, you do the magic flute, and it just seems like somebody vomited a rainbow on stage. There's just color everywhere. How does the preparation change between those two summers?
Yes, and that's great, because that sort of ties into a lot of the research and the historical research. So for Figaro, Donna wanted to set that in sort of this Downton Abbey-esque world. And I just happened to have loved that show. So I was like doing somersaults in my house when I heard that. And in fact, my mom and I actually went to Highclere Castle where they filmed the show. So it was just like, I was over the moon. So that was wonderful, and I love to do that research. And Donna and I actually met in Manhattan and went to see the Downton Abbey exhibit that was on tour in the United States. So we really like got to look at like examples from the TV show, and how the servant class was depicted. And one thing that we talked about was how to create individuality even within those uniforms, because when you're wearing a uniform and you put uniforms on people, you're basically saying everybody is the same. But when you're trying to tell a story about people, you want to bring out like nuance of the individual people. So there was a lot of things that I could do, like for this sort of like the female servant, the maids, they all had like a slightly different lace, different hats. So I could sort of tinker and play with those like, small details, but still meaningful. Then when you get to Magic Flute, that yes, was quite colorful. That concept was, very much like fantastical, not set in a specific time period. The idea was to be sort of playful, and then we had all of those like children as the animals, and that kind of led me into the bright and colorful world. But yeah, and also having like actual like the color of birds as inspiration. And if you look at like actual like these birds, these tropical birds in nature, they are actually that vibrant with their color.
You have this amazing ability of turning something wonderful out of what seems like nothing. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's mind-blowing. Has there ever been a production that you had been a part of where you started it and you said, I don't know how the heck we're going to do this, and you got to the end of it and you went, I don't know how the heck we did that?
Yes. I feel like that happens a lot. And you have to kind of go into these situations, regardless of what your resources are, just always having to come up with a solution and always having to think on your feet, and not even having one solution to something, but like multiple options. And not an opera, but I did a film. It was actually like a documentary film. So I had to film like background people. And we're talking like hundreds. And I remember sitting in a production meeting thinking, I can't do this. I want to get up and I want to walk out because it was so overwhelming. And then I looked around at all of those people sitting there and was like, I have to do this. But then it dawned on me that like I didn't really have a choice if I cared about these people and I cared about like the collective thing that we were doing together.
Is there a medium that is more difficult than the other? You said you've done film, you've done opera. I assume you've also done theater as well.
Yes.
Is there a medium that you go, okay, this is going to be real work?
Yeah, that's tricky. I mean, it really depends on the project. I mean, opera is always difficult because of the sort of the numbers. You're talking about like, you know, large numbers of chorus, multiple costume changes. That always seems much more difficult. As opposed to like, you know, a 4-person play that's like, I can go out and shop, you know, in a week. And, you know, dance I do also a lot of dance that has its own challenges because you have to deal with people move. But usually there's just one look for everybody. So there's difficult things about each. But it really sort of like, it really depends on the specific project. But if I were to say like one thing is like more challenging, or most challenging, I would say opera, which is what I mostly do. But I love it. I absolutely love it. I can't imagine doing anything else.
Now, you're also the costume director at Opera Philadelphia. And
yes, I am.
A few years ago, Opera Philadelphia started doing a fall festival season that they call the Festival season, right?
Yes,
yes. How has that changed the way you approach doing your job, since you now have 3 or 4 productions in a short amount of time in completely different venues happening all over the city?
Oh yes, it is like, it was sort of a game changer to sort of like, you know, sort of learn how to do that. And I have to say, like, one of the things, and I didn't mention this, but one of the things that makes one successful is if you hire the right people. Yep. And have the right people surrounding you. And if you always have people that have your back, or like, you know, that know how to do their jobs, are really hard workers and trust in you. And I think that's one thing that's really great about Opera Maine, is like everybody is like, you know, or even Opera Philadelphia, everybody's wanting to do the same thing and everybody cares about it. So to answer your question, how do I do that job? It's just having the right people, trusting people that they can do their job. I don't micromanage. I always tell people I'm not a micromanager. So I entrust and instill confidence in people.
I have always looked at folks on the production team with great respect. For instance, I may be on stage for a 2-hour opera, maybe a total of 40 minutes, okay? However, your product is on stage from beginning to end on every single body that's on stage. Mm-hmm. You can say the same thing about a set designer, the same thing about a lighting designer. Their product is always on the stage. Do you ever feel a sense of panic and nerves that your product is there the entire night, or has it become almost you've gotten used to it over time?
I think when you make the choices, you have to take ownership for them. Mm-hmm. You know, you have to take ownership for them. And I mean, I tell my students that, because sometimes they'll do like presentations and then they'll start to excuse it. And I'm like, nope, it's your work, you own it. Like, you make up whatever, like, justification. But yeah, sure, there's moments where I was like, oh, maybe I should have done that differently. Mm-hmm. But we also have, like, you know, the the tech rehearsals and the dress rehearsals to modify things or edit things. You know, there's some things that like you might fall in love with, you know, in the research or even like in the fittings. You're like, this can work. And then you see it on stage and it just doesn't work. It doesn't work visually or it doesn't work practically. Mm-hmm. And that's hard. It's hard to let go of things that you've spent so much time crafting and thinking about.
Last question. Is there a production that you've done at Opera Maine that you look back on still and say, boy, I'm proud of that product?
It really, I think it comes down to, I think 3. I think it's hard for me to do a definitive one, but I am so proud of the Carmen that we did. Mm-hmm. And the Traviata, we set that in like the 1930s, and I love that time period. Thought it was really remarkable. And Figaro, I loved Figaro and Flute. So that's actually 4. I said 3. I listed 4. I don't know. I thought they were all so different, and that's why like it's so great to like work at Opera Maine and to like have this career. It's like they're all opera, but they were all very different productions. Having been a part of 3 or 4 of them, I can confirm your work in Carmen, Le Nozze di Figaro, and The Magic Flute was stellar. Just absolutely fantastic. Millie, thank you so much for sitting with me today and chatting a little bit. I know the folks at Opera Maine truly appreciate all of your hard work over the years, and we cannot wait to get you back up there again. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Millie Hiibel and a chance to look back at some of the great productions that Opera Maine has put on over the last decade. Next week, my guest is Maeve Hoagland, who made her company debut in 2016 as Frasquita in Carmen, and then 2 years later played opposite of me as the Susanna to my Figaro in Le Nozze di Figaro. If you haven't done so already, please like and subscribe to us on YouTube at Opera Maine, or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Opera Maine. To play us out this week, we're going to give you a second slideshow of some of the wonderful work that Millie has done for Opera Maine. These are the productions from 2016 to 2019, and they include Carmen, La Traviata, Le Nozze di Figaro, and The Magic Flute. Thanks for joining this week, and I'll see you when I see you.